ignition switches. On. RPM switches. Set. TD switches. Normal. Doors and hatches. Closed. Light out. Strobe light. On. Restart check is complete. Clear left. Engineers, start number 2. Starting 2. Wind 310, Pilot Project Podcast. Clear takeoff. Runway 31 left.
All right, we're ready for departure here at the Pilot Project Podcast, the best source for stories and advice from the pilots of the RCAF. I'm your host, Brian Morrison, and we are here today for part 2 of our discussion with Duncan MacIsaac. Today, we'll be hearing about his time instructing on Sea Kings, flying the Tracker, flying the Aurora, and transitioning to civilian life, including his involvement with the veteran community. Without further ado, here we go into part 2 of our chat with Duncan. So after a time, you transitioned to training other Sea King pilots at 406 Maritime Operational Training Squadron. How did this experience differ from operations?
Well, the big thing was, of course, you didn't have to do any deployments aboard ship. You would take them out sometimes and do a little training with what we called DDLs, destroyer deck landing, and basically teach them how to land on the aircraft or on the ship. But yeah, the big difference was you were home every night, basically.
What did that involve, teaching them to land on a ship?
Just getting them used to landing on a small area. And I can talk a little bit about the bear trap, if you'd like.
Oh, sure.
The bear trap and the hold-down system was very good. And some people think that the hold-down system just takes over and lands the aircraft. It doesn't. All it does is make you a little more stable. But basically, you're controlling the helicopter right to the landing.
Can you explain what the bear trap is?
A bear trap is basically you're lowering a cable from the aircraft down to the deck. They're hooking up a heavier cable from the ship, which now goes up inside the helicopter and gets locked into what we call the probe. You've lowered a probe from the helicopter, which goes inside the bear trap. And when you've landed the helicopter, the landing safety officer, who's in a hara off to the side of the flight deck, will close the bear trap. And it basically, at this point, you have the helicopter part of the deck.
Okay. And so it basically locks it in place once it's down.
Correct. Yeah.
And so you were saying people think that the bear trap sort of does it for you, but that's not the case.
It is not the case. No. You can override, even at maximum tension on the hold-down cable, you can override that with collective.
And so what's it doing for you as you are still like in the hover to land? What's the bear trap doing for you?
The bear trap is making the helicopter more stable. If you're landing at night and it's a fairly heavy sea, the ship is moving around quite a bit. But no matter how much a ship is rolling and pitching, there'll be a steady period. And that is the job of the landing safety officer. He has to determine exactly when the deck is steady, and he'll tell the pilot to land now.
And so you just basically, I don't know if this is the right term, but you basically thump it in at that moment. It's time to bring it in.
Yes, you do. Yeah. But you don't want to thump it too hard.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you might lose a Swanson.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
And I believe that the bear trap is a Canadian invention, isn't it?
It is. And I know when they first started using it, other navies would come and look at it and determine if it was something that they needed to have. Because I think Canada was one of the first countries to actually land such a big helicopter on a small ship.
That's pretty interesting.
There were two different kind of ships at the time. A class of ship with the Huron. There were 4 of them that had 2 helicopters. So there were 2 hangars, a bit of a larger flight deck, and you had 2 helicopters on it. The other ships I was on, Annapolis and Saguenay, only had the 1 helicopter, 1 hangar. And each ship had a little bit of a different role to it. But the landing safety officer is the guy who decides that when you have a city deck and it's safe to land.
So we got on this topic because we were talking about teaching students to land on ships. You did that initially just in a small space on land, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And then on that course, did you take them to land on a ship eventually, or was that part of their operational training?
That's generally part of their operational training, but it could also be done by the instructors on 406 Squadron.
So what's that like the first time you take a student from doing it on land to doing it on a ship? What does that feel like?
For the instructor, of course, it's not terribly big a deal, but I think for the student, it's probably definitely more challenging for them to do that right.
Yeah. So I've interviewed a Cyclone pilot a little while ago, and I have to say the maritime helicopter role, it's just got so many things about it that seem so challenging and so intimidating. I think you've really got to have guts to do that job.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I was talking to a young snowbird pilot at one point. He had only been an instructor in Moose Jaw and a snowbird pilot.
Okay.
And I said, yeah, that's a really cool job you're doing, but you should try flying a Sea King at night. And he had to think about it and said, yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, it's interesting because we do have those instructors. We call them pipeline instructors or pipeliners. It's got to be an interesting world because you've only ever been in the training system.
Right.
So they've got an immense amount of experience in instruction and in that world, but then they don't have that operational experience. So it's a bit of a trade-off.
Yes.
But I have a lot of respect for what they do and for the time they put in. And I don't know how it was in the 70s, but certainly nowadays in Moose Jaw, they're putting in some long hours and doing a lot of flying and a lot of good work. So
yeah, they work very hard and they really know their airplane well.
Oh yeah, they're the pros for sure. Moose Jaw is probably one of the most intense flying experiences I've ever had, and that was in part due to the expertise and intensity that those instructors brought to the table.
Yeah, I agree.
So back to your time training students, what key lessons did you try to impart to your students?
Well, one of the most important ones is if, you think something's not quite right, then you need to speak up. Because if you see something, you say something, right? And cockpit resource management was a fairly new item that we talked about. And it doesn't matter how inexperienced you might be or might feel. Quite often, the insight that you get from another pilot is something that needs to be said. The information being passed along, and it's always important that they do that.
Yeah, that's something we emphasized on the Aurora as well, as you, I'm sure, experienced once you were on that fleet.
Yeah,
you've got 3 people on the flight deck and a whole crew in the back end, and all with varying ranks and levels of experience. And the biggest thing you want to encourage is that passage of information. And like you said, if you see something, say something. If you notice something's going wrong, or if you think, hey, that might not be right, the worst thing that's going to happen is the pilot or whoever you're saying it to says, yeah, Raj, that's intentional, or yeah, I'm following that, thanks. But you might be noticing something that no one else has seen.
Yeah, certainly as an instructor, you do the ground school, you follow the syllabus, and you teach in ground school, you teach in the airplane, but sometimes it just takes somebody asking the right question. And as the person would say, there's no dumb questions, only dumb answers.
Yeah. How did you find the experience of going from basically concentrating on getting the job done to more of a focus on mentorship?
Well, I certainly found when you're an instructor pilot, you're trying to, as I said, teach all the skills and knowledge that they'll need to know, but you'll also want them to be able to make that transition to the operational side of things. You want to make sure that they have all the information and tools that they need to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. I know it makes me think about someone that we both know, Mary Cameron Kelly, who was recently inducted into I think it's Canada's Aviation Hall of Fame. She was my instructor on the operational training unit for the Aurora. We call it MOAT. And that was one of the big things I noticed about her and she did a lot of my training through to aircraft captain and crew commander. And one of the things I noticed about her was that she wasn't just teaching me how to do the job. She was teaching me how to be almost a good person and do the job. Like, she was mentoring me in how to be a leader and how to be not just a pilot with your hands and feet, but a pilot in terms of how you treat people and how you interact with maintainers and their crew and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I was lucky to have Mary as a crew commander as well. And what you're saying is absolutely correct. Not only was she probably the best pilot that I ever flew with, but a good person and very conscientious of what the crew needs and what the crew does. And,
yeah,
that's important too.
Yeah, Mary's very well loved. And how crazy is that you and I had the same crew commander?
That is crazy. Yeah. And we went to Hawaii together, and it was a wonderful trip, I have to say. We stayed in hotels out in Hawaii, and when we came back, they told us we could stop for gas, but we weren't allowed to stay overnight anywhere because we had already spent all the money that was in our budget. So I said, well, if we can't stay overnight, we're not going to stop for gas unless we have to. So I had a couple of places lined up to stop for, and I would call them an hour beforehand and say, thanks, but no thanks, we don't need the gas. So we were lucky that Greenwood was wide open. I was clearing $1 million on the East Coast. And we flew home direct from Hawaii, from Fairbanks Point to Greenwood, about 12 and a half hours.
You guys made it in one shot from Hawaii to Greenwood.
We did. One shot. And the only way we could do it legally is by changing our flight plan from IFR to VFR flight plan, about an hour outside of Greenwood.
Oh, wow.
And we landed with the legal fuel.
That's quite an accomplishment. I've done the trip to Hawaii a couple times, and actually once with Mary in 2016. And we stopped every time in Comox overnight, and then from Comox to Greenwood. So I've never done that's a long trip. I've never done that before.
It is a long trip, but as you know, stopping for fuel somewhere only adds a minimum of 2 hours to your flight time or to your day. And more than likely it'll be 3 or 4 hours by the time you get back up in the air. So no, if we don't need to, we're not going to stop.
Yeah, and I don't know what the rules were like back then, but you'd probably be getting close to busting your crew day if, like, in terms of the maximum hours you could be on duty if you had stopped.
Yeah.
So up next, you took a break from flying in your career. After instructing on the Sea King, you were in charge of the officer training courses at CFB Chilliwack and the summer training courses for the regular officer training plan. What did these duties involve, and how did your previous aviation training aid you in them?
Basically, you were looking after the school in Chilliwack, making sure that we had the 3 schools at the time. There was the school in Cornwallis, the school in Chilliwack, and the school in Borden. So there were 3 of us that worked the schedules, made sure everything worked the right way. And I would say the skill that I employed the most was making something big fit in a small space, because you had to make sure the schedule worked right. You had to make sure that the summertime ROTP students would get their basic training done during the summer when they weren't in school, and at the same time you had to keep the school happy. And they were very they were looking after their instructors, of course, so they wanted to give people time off and whatnot. But so it was a fine line sometimes to make sure that people were doing the right thing, getting the job done, but keeping people happy at the same time.
Yeah, trying to meet the demands without basically burning out your people, which is always a balance in the military.
Yeah, it is. It was 3 years, and at the time, I was looking to go on and fly something else. I wanted to make sure, because there was a tendency to, once you were a Sea King pilot, they wanted to keep that expertise. So the farther you could get away from it, the better chance you had of moving on to something else.
Can I ask what made you want to change from being a Sea King pilot?
Well, I think I indicated at the start that I wanted to fly fixed-wing aircraft.
Oh, right. The Hercules.
Yeah. Being in Trenton, in Training Systems headquarters, I saw that the Herc pilots were away a lot of the time. And at the time, I had a young family, so I really didn't want to do that. But I did have a friend that was on 80D Squadron, and he called me up and said, "Would you be interested in flying the Tracker?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds like something I'd want to do." So that's how I ended up going to the Tracker.
Okay. And that's something I think that's important for listeners, especially we have a lot of listeners who are in the military flight training system now or who are fairly early in their career. I think it's important to recognize sometimes those dreams might change as your life changes, as you get married, as you have kids, as things change in your personal situation. It's normal and it's a good thing to sit back and reevaluate, like, is this still what fits for me? What's the best fit for my life right now?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like you said, up next for you was the CP-121 Tracker. What was the Tracker like to fly?
Well, I think I described the Tracker as like driving an old sports car. Yes, it was an older aircraft, and those big radial engines made a lot of noise, but it was a fun aircraft to fly. And certainly the type of mission we did, we had, I believe, 18 aircraft. Um, Three-quarters of them were serviceable at the time, at any one time.
That's pretty good.
So on a weekend, if you want to go away somewhere, you were able to do that. So as long as you would be going to a military base, then everything was taken care of in that respect. So you weren't eating up the budget by going away, but you were getting the experience and flying the aircraft in a generally a more intense kind of labor-intensive area where they had lots of aircraft flying around.
Yeah, for sure. We've kind of said that before on the show. Sometimes people will talk about taking an aircraft on the road on the weekend and going to a fun location, going somewhere that they've always wanted to go. And I'm always concerned, like maybe someone will hear that and think, well, hang on, like they're just using these aircraft, for their own travel. But there's no such thing as a flight that doesn't give you really valuable training, especially when you're going somewhere new, somewhere that operates a little differently, somewhere that has more high density traffic. All that stuff is really good training.
Yeah, and it's very important that all pilots know how to fly in a high density traffic area.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a key skill. If you're doing it for the first time under some kind of adverse conditions, you haven't practiced it before, you have no training in it, and now the weather's bad or you're having an emergency or something like that, it's just going to be so stressful. It's so important to get exposed to that experience, I think early and often if possible.
Yeah, that's true.
So were you excited to finally make that switch from rotary to fixed wing?
I was, and it was kind of funny because I don't know if it's still like that now, but back in the day, I suspected that we overtrained because the career manager was the guy who looks after your career, of course, but he's got a number of files that he's moving people around with. He wanted me to have a refresher course. So he talked about going back to Moose Jaw, but then he said, well, all those courses are full. So maybe I'll get you on a Twin Otter course. So I'm like, well, wait a minute. You learn how to fly the Twin Otter before you learn how to fly the Tracker? So anyway, my friend called me up again and he said, do you really need a refresher course? And how about you just come Trackers and we'll teach you what you need? And I said, that sounds good to me. I just want to fly. So anyway, I went to Summerside and did the Tracker OTU. There were three of us, Paul Turpey and myself and one other who was a returning Tracker pilot. And I believe I did one more trip than he did. So once again, you talk about overtraining sometimes, and other times you just do what's needed.
Yeah, for sure. And that's another name that anyone who, I have no idea if any of my colleagues from the Aurora days listen to this show, but Paul Turpey is another well-known name in the Aurora community, another very well-respected guy who's a great mentor to new pilots. So that's really cool that we have a couple colleagues in common.
Yeah.
Did you find any particular challenges switching from rotary to fixed wing? I suppose you'd had the fixed wing experience on the Tudor. So was it pretty easy to make that switch?
Well, I think because of the graduating in Moose Jaw made a difference. Definitely, helicopter will fly differently than a fixed wing aircraft. But as I had mentioned, a friend of mine who was on trackers, it took me for my first tracker flight. The Sea King would do a touch and go landing, but the difference was because it had wheels. The difference was you level the nose, so that didn't work on a tracker very well. And I bounced a few times. And I looked over at my instructor, who was a friend of mine. He was laughing, and I said, "Instead of laughing, how about you help out?" So you learn very quickly to do a proper flare.
Yeah, I imagine so.
Yeah. The good thing about the tracker, though, it was designed to fly off a carrier. So the main gear was pretty hefty. It could take a lot of bouncing.
Yeah, pretty sturdy.
Yeah.
So like the Aurora, the tracker was a rare bird in that it was an armed multi-engine platform, rare at least in the Canadian Forces. What was it like to fire rockets? Was that exciting?
Yeah, it was probably twice a year would go to the Tracadie range and carry two pods of rockets. You could either fire them singly or fire a salvo. So the range basically had a target, and you had a range safety officer, and he would call your whether your rockets hit the target or were close enough to the target or whatever. So he would rate your firing ability. But the rocket could also fire salvo, and I got to do that once, where you put both pods on to fire salvo, and all rockets fired at the same time. That was very exciting.
Yeah, I think that sounds really fun.
Yeah.
And did you hit it?
Of course. Well, what a question. Yeah.
Yeah, you're a professional.
Well, it's interesting because, we would practice rocket runs with the Navy, the type of exercises we did. And the procedure was to be as close to the water as possible. And you'd pop up and roll in on your target, fire rockets, and get away as quickly as possible. But if you ever had to do that in real life, your odds of doing the second half of that, getting away unharmed, was unlikely. You never had to do that in real life, thank heavens.
Yeah, so I was going to ask that. So the intended target of these rockets these were anti-ship rockets, essentially.
Correct. That's correct.
Yeah, that's interesting. You describing that approach. It's almost a cross between, if you think back to World War II, sort of a cross between the approach of a torpedo aircraft and then popping up and almost doing a dive bomb profile.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what you'd be doing.
Which were both very dangerous jobs.
It would be a suicide mission.
Yeah.
You would hope to have your target first, though.
Yeah. Well, like you said, thank goodness you never had to do that in anger.
No.
And this was all during the height of the Cold War, right?
This was during the Cold War. So whether it be Sea King or tracker, whenever we deployed on an Eastland or NATO mission, we always had company. People were following us around and, seeing what the tactics were. And we knew there was a submarine underneath as well. So they were always there.
They were always like observing and trying to basically analyze NATO tactics.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess there must have been more of a feeling during the Cold War of like, okay, this could be for real. Like we might really need to use these. We might really do a rocket attack. We might really need to hunt a submarine.
Yeah, that's correct. And we were Cold War warriors, but war could have broken out at any time, and almost did back in the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But you had to be prepared in case things got heated up.
Yeah, for sure. Thank goodness for JFK there.
Yeah.
So During your time with 880 Maritime Reconnaissance Squadron, you flew the tracker to Bermuda and even to the magnetic North Pole. Can you tell us more about these experiences?
Yeah, the tracker was quite often, like I said, flying with the Navy doing exercises. So when the Navy headed south, then the tracker would be deployed to Bermuda. They had the fuel tanks down there that the tracker could use. And when I finally got on the tracker OTU, the Operational Training Unit, on our course, we were the last two trackers that landed in Bermuda. We refueled, and when we left, those fuel tanks were decommissioned. So we were the last two trackers in Bermuda. The trip I took to the magnetic North Pole was on a northern patrol. And basically what we do is fly up north and land at various locations up there, and we would check on the dew line to make sure that the radars, basically the stations were still there and in one piece. And when we went to the magnetic North Pole, it was also a bit of a show of the flag, because there was an ice station located on the ice at the magnetic North Pole, and we flew around them just alone. We were there and keeping an eye on them. And they were outside Canadian territorial water, but we had to let them know that we were there.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the dew line. Can you explain to listeners? Probably some of our younger listeners don't know what the dew line is. Can you explain what that is?
There was a system of radars across the north, basically looking for anybody that would enter the North American area, whether it be airplanes transiting to the United States or entering Canadian airspace that shouldn't be there. So the dew line was, like I say, a collection of radars that were across the north, and you would have to have a clearance to enter Canadian airspace.
Dew line stood for distant early warning.
Yeah.
The other question I really wanted to ask you about flying to the magnetic North Pole was, what was your compass doing? Was it basically just spinning around?
The compass was just spinning around, and when you go up north, you would operate what we call the Omega system in true. In other words, the magnetic, your compass in your magnetic system was useless to you, so you operated in everything in true.
To true north.
Yep.
Yep, and that's, of course, for anyone familiar with northern operations, still done today. Well, because you have to. But
because you have to.
It's a lot easier nowadays, though, with the advent of GPS and all those different things. Was there any extra challenges involved in flying up north when you were up there?
Well, like I said, you had to have somebody teach you how you would run the Omega system in true. Once you knew how to do it, it wasn't terribly complex. But until you knew how to do it and had confidence in it, that it would get you home. The ADF system, or the direction finding system, basically is a signal sent out from a tower to any aircraft. And up north, they were quite strong. So, I mean, you could dial in on a ADF system and know exactly where you were.
Okay, so you had some other ways to back up your Omega system, in true, and
that's right,
and use those ADFs to confirm basically where you were.
Yeah,
we've touched a little on this, but what were the roles the tracker served in?
Well, like I said, doing the exercises for the Navy, a combat exercise where the Navy would assign you either to look at an area, they want you to do a surface search, make sure that the friend or foe kind of thing. And the other one is just a surveillance system, like I said, the Northern Patrol, with show the flag and seeing who's around, see who's up there. And the Fisher Patrol. Yeah, quite often we would fly out of St. John's And we worked for the Department of Fisheries when we were over there. And they would have certain areas where they wanted you to look at. And you were out on the Grand Banks quite a bit.
Yeah.
And there is an area known as the Flemish Cap, which is quite far out. And tracker is interesting because it actually burns more fuel if you have an engine failure because you're using the one engine to fly on. And so your prudent limit of endurance was SPLE, which is single engine prudent limit of endurance. So you would have to, you only have about 15 or 20 minutes on the Flemish Cap and before you'd have to return to back to St. John's.
Oh, wow. So it's a little further out than I was thinking.
Yep. Yeah, it's quite far out, past the 200-mile limit.
Did you guys on the tracker do much ASW or anti-submarine warfare?
Once we lost the carrier Bonaventure, the most of the equipment for anti-submarine warfare was removed, and it became just a coastal reconnaissance aircraft. Although we still carried a few Sonobuoys, certainly not the number that we used to when the aircraft was on the SWR platform.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. And I guess that would just be because once you were not operating off a ship, you were no longer really using that role to screen the high value asset or the carrier.
Yeah, correct. And it limited the range too in what you could do.
Oh yeah, of course.
What they had done is they had installed a fuel tank in the down where underneath where the torpedoes would normally be. And interestingly enough, you have to use that fuel first and make sure that because there was no gauge that would tell you how much was in it. You want to make sure that tank was full, and so you use that first, and then your wing tanks.
Okay. So similar then to the Aurora with the center tank and then the wing tanks.
Correct. Yeah. Except on the Aurora, I think everything was pretty much automatic, although the flight engineer would definitely select which position you wanted. In the tracker, you would definitely want to make sure that toggle switch is thrown open first and make sure that the fuel's coming out of that tank first.
That's funny to hear you say that the Aurora is more automatic because, of course, we thought of the Aurora as we were flying it, in 2012 as fairly manual compared to a lot of modern aircraft.
Yeah.
But of course, it'd be far more automatic than the tracker, which was truly manual.
Yeah, that's true. But you know what? The tracker had a very nice autopilot because although it was old, it had a system where you could dial down your altitude. So you could dial it down to 500 feet a minute of descent, and it would hold that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Which is pretty advanced autopilot for the 70s.
Yes, it was. Yep.
And for an aircraft that at that time was already fairly old.
Yeah, that's correct. The other aspect I found kind of strange when I made the transition to the Aurora was that we had on the tracker, we had what's called handheld radio for SARSAT.
So when you say SARSAT, search and rescue satellite, right?
Yeah, that's correct. In the Aurora, it was a Gibson Girl, which at the time I was saying, well, the tracker just retired. Why don't you take the radios from the tracker and put them in the Aurora and get rid of the Gibson Girl? But
and for the listeners, it's funny you say that. I just finished volunteering a little bit last year at the Aviation Museum in Winnipeg, and they have a Gibson Girl. And for listeners, a Gibson Girl is a hand-cranked rescue radio that you had to crank to transmit on. So basically, Duncan went from an older aircraft that had modern-day SAR, search and rescue satellite radios, and then went to the Aurora, which had a hand-cranked radio.
Yeah, correct. But of course, any kind of equipment change would require, as you know, everything to be approved by Ottawa, and it would have to be, I forget the term.
Essentially validated for flight.
Right. Yeah.
And which is always a big process.
Yeah, a big process. Yeah.
So as we've said, the tracker was eventually decommissioned and you found yourself flying Auroras. How did the Aurora and the tracker compare in terms of how they flew and operated?
Oh, a huge difference because, as I said, the tracker was with the old engines and the old radial engines. It was quite loud. The Aurora was like, now you're moving from much older aircraft to a more modern aircraft, a 4-engine aircraft, very much more capable of doing different things and flying a lot longer.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest thing I liked about the Aurora was to be able to go back and get a coffee.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite things too.
And also being able to use the washroom. That's very important.
Yes. Yeah. Honestly, one of my two things when I was choosing an aircraft was that I wanted to be able to get a coffee and use the bathroom. So the Aurora checked those boxes.
There you go. Pilots are the same no matter what.
Yeah, that's right. And in terms of how they handled as an aircraft, how did they compare?
To tell you the truth, the Aurora was a big airplane. So when you're down at 200 feet, you had to be very, very careful about, making sure you didn't do a turn, an uncoordinated turn kind of thing, because you could lose altitude very quickly.
Yep.
I found with the tracker, you could feel what the aircraft was doing much more so than you could with the Aurora.
So tracker was a little more forgiving down low?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, I had no problem flying a tracker down to 50 feet if necessary.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't want to do that with an Aurora.
No, for sure. We don't go that low in the Aurora.
Yeah. And anyway, I did find that the Aurora was very nice to take up to high altitude and go on long trips.
Yep. Yeah, it's a comfortable plane, and it's got lots of power. Great for climbing. Lots of power down low.
What a lot of people maybe don't know is that when you're on patrol, you shut down an engine. So we call it loitering number 1, which we do from time to time as necessary to save fuel.
Yep.
Because you're not going that fast. You're staying in your own area. In a search and rescue situation, you can, in the lower weight, once you've burned off some fuel, you can loiter 2 engines. So now you're down to 2 engines. And there's an altitude restriction because, of course, if you do have a problem with one of your operating engines, you have to start the other engine fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we used to do that for training sometimes. I tried to do it as often as possible just to get people comfortable with it, because it's a little uncomfortable to be flying a 4-engine aircraft and to have 2 engines turned off. You really want to make sure everybody's familiar with those procedures, ready for what we do next if something goes wrong. There's a lot of briefing involved before you do it.
Right.
But I thought it was pretty cool that the Aurora was able to do that.
Yeah. And, the airplane flies quite well on 2 engines.
Yep.
But it doesn't fly very well on 1.
No. But you can, so something that, it's funny, Mary Cameron Kelly showed me this. One thing we used to do sometimes is when we were down to 2 engines, we were up at a nice safe altitude, and you pull one of the remaining engines back to idle and then tell the crew, okay, crew, we're essentially on 1 engine right now. This is what it would feel like.
Yep.
We're descending at this rate. We would have this many minutes until we hit the water, in which we would start other engines. We can easily do that.
Yeah.
So now you can see that even if we were to lose an engine, we're not falling out of the sky. And it would make people have a lot more confidence in going down to 2 engines.
Yeah. So doing it and having the rest of the crew see it being done, very important that they have the confidence that it has that capability.
Yeah, I agree for sure. So one thing I wanted to explain to the listeners quickly is, why is it more efficient to have 3 engines on a higher power setting rather than 4 engines on a lower power setting? So basically, we're doing this in a situation, like Duncan said, where you're loitering in a small area. You're probably doing ASW, anti-submarine warfare, or you're doing search and rescue work. You're not trying to go somewhere high and fast. You're staying down low. And basically, the short answer is, in a turbine engine, in a turboprop, the hotter the turbine is burning, the more fuel efficient it is. So it's actually more efficient to have 3 engines set at a hotter, higher power setting than to have 4 engines set low. And that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah. And you explained that much better than I could.
So what would you say were some of the highlights of your time on the Aurora?
Definitely the trips that we did. We flew over to Iceland and we went to Scotland. The operation that we did with the Dutch, three Dutch P3s, Operation Manna. It was 50 years since that operation took place. And what happened was, at the end of World War II, when the Germans were pulling out of Holland, they blew a lot of the dikes and the dams, and a lot of villages were isolated by water. So people really were having a hard time getting enough food. So very quickly, Bomber Command converted some of the planes from dropping bombs to be able to drop food. So they would fly over, and of course, manna means food from heaven, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they would they saved a lot of lives by dropping those supplies down to them. And it was 50 years later that we did the formation flight with them in commemorating Operation Manna. And it was a 52 plane formation flight that flew all over Holland, just to let the people know that we were still thinking of them. And the Canadians are very welcome over in the Netherlands because of, at the end of World War II, the country was liberated by the Canadian troops. And it was a very moving experience for us to be able to do that for them.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. To have the opportunity to go there to a place with such a deep connection to Canada must have been really something.
Yeah, it was. And like I said, we were looking down at all the people that were lining the streets, and even Schiphol Airport. We flew right over it, and they stopped everybody from moving until the formation was turned around and headed back towards our various dispersal locations. So it was quite moving.
And I'll just note for the listeners, you mentioned that you were in formation with 3 Dutch P3s. A P3 is what the rest of the world calls a CP-140 Aurora. The CP-140 is the Canadian name. Everyone else calls it a P3 Orion. Just something to note. So basically, he was in formation with with 3 other Auroras. Were there any big challenges involved in coordinating with that many nations and that many aircraft?
Well, first of all, to get authorization to do the formation, we had to get permission to be able to do that from Ottawa. So we did practice quite a bit with another Aurora before going over there. Once we were there, we had a briefing with the operators of the Dutch P3s, and it was a very detailed what can and can't happen during the flight. And yeah, it was very interesting working with them and coordinating with them. So it was very interesting, as I said.
And listeners who do check out the video that Duncan has online from our show notes, there are some photos there of that experience, close-up photos with information with those Dutch P3s and some of the pictures of the formation, and it's really cool. Speaking of formation flying, you flew all 3 operational aircraft you've flown in formation. Which one was your favorite, and which was the most nerve-wracking? And how were the experiences different?
Yeah, I flew a 3-plane in the Sea King, a 5-plane with the tracker, because at the end, when the tracker was being decommissioned, we had planned to fly over Shearwater and Halifax and Summerside on our way to Mountain View in Ontario. So we practiced that, and being number 4 in a 5-plane, the old accordion effect takes place. And the engines on a tracker are not quite as responsive as the Aurora engine.
Okay.
So you're playing with the throttle quite a bit. But you're still trying to be as smooth as you can for number 5, which is Taylor and Charlie, and he's really feeling the accordion effect.
Right.
So, yeah, that was a challenge. And of course, the flying information with the Aurora, a big airplane, you don't want to be in your position too much, not too close and not too far either. because then you're going to be paying catch up.
Yeah. So which was the most challenging then? Probably the tracker because you're in position number 4?
Yeah, I would say the tracker, but the seeking was challenging too because it was quite often referred to as a bunch of loose parts of flying information. So when you're flying information with a bunch of parts flying information, it can be challenging.
Yeah, I imagine. A little nerve-wracking maybe.
Yeah.
So your career also included a stint as the recruiting detachment commander in Corner Brook, Newfoundland, where you were heavily involved in recruiting. What led you to take on this role, and what was the experience like?
Well, when the tracker was decommissioned, of course, then you had a lot of people that had to go to various other jobs. So I would have preferred, of course, to go flying somewhere else. But at the time, we were experiencing the college surplus, and so I chose recruiting to go to. Being in that for the first 2 years, probably I enjoyed it because giving jobs to people who really need really want the position. That's fairly important. So the first 2 years there was a lot of job opening. Any other detachments that couldn't fill the position, we could, and then things slowed down, and they weren't recruiting as much as they had been. So we had another 2 years that I tried to keep the staff over there motivated. So it was a staff of seven or eight people, I guess. And that was a challenge, keeping people motivated to, even though we had slowed down quite a bit, you still wanted them to be able to do the job properly.
What was causing that slowdown?
I think at the time, I think the military might have been readjusting quite a bit. Like I say, we had lost a tracker, and I think other units had lost their positions as well. So I guess there was an influx of people, and now suddenly you slowed down, kind of like formation flying, where where things happen really fast, and now it's time to slow down. So
Yep. Okay. This wasn't during the force reduction period, was it?
yes, it may have been. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So that may have had something to do with it as
just
well.
initially, the start of it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that must have been pretty challenging to keep people going and keep people motivated. I find it's a lot harder to be the person who's setting the tone. It's a lot easier to get swept along with how people are feeling, especially when morale starts to be a little lower. It's very hard to be the trendsetter who keeps things upbeat. So how did you do that?
Yeah, it was a challenge, kind of like feast and famine. We went through the feast, now we have the famine. But we did quite a bit of adventure training. We were working fairly closely with the reserve unit over there. We had started recruiting for them. And to do that, we wanted to know exactly what it was they were doing. So we had some training, some adventure training, which was interesting. We went with them and out into the field, and we did all the stuff that we normally do to set up a camp, and had to rely a little bit on what I had done during my basic training. Had to learn to be my basic grunt again, I guess, or an infantry soldier. But that was interesting. Yeah, very challenging and very interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, you guys were in Newfoundland, so it's a great place to be outside. That's one of the big pastimes of living in Newfoundland and Labrador is time outside. People love to hunt and fish and hike and all those things, right? It's got a lot of beautiful spaces.
Yeah, correct. One of the things we did was go up to Grossmore National Park.
Oh, beautiful!
And we took a day and we went up there, and I took several of the staff and we climbed Grossmore Mountain. And I remember sitting about halfway up, we decided to take a little rest, and we could see someone coming. Basically, it was like almost like a gully and a lot of rocks. And as it turns out, it was a young girl, and she just said hi and kept right on going. She didn't need to stop for us at all. I think she had done it before. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Put you guys to shame a little bit.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your transition to civilian life and your community involvement. After 27 years of service, you transitioned to civilian life while continuing as a reservist in Greenwood operations for another 8 years. How did you navigate this change? And what advice would you give to other service members facing a similar transition? And did you find joining the reserves helped ease your transition to civilian life?
I definitely did. At the time, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So one of the guys I worked with said, well, how about you consider joining the reserves and you can continue to do the same job and it would just be 10 days a month. And so I decided that this sounded pretty good. So I made the transition to the reserve unit. And it's kind of a funny story with that one because I had done the interview and everything looked good. And so I had done my last shift as a reg force officer. And on the next shift, I was back at work and I got a phone call. It was the reserve unit. And they said, Captain MacIsaac, where are you at right now? And I'd work, of course. And she said, well, you do have to sign some papers first, you know. So, oh, yeah. Yeah, there's that part of it, too. So anyway, I took an hour or so and went to the reserve unit and did the paperwork that was required.
Do you have any advice you'd give to service members who are maybe getting to the end of a long career?
Well, it is interesting because I was reading the Legion magazine, which as a Legion member, you get the magazine. They are talking about recruiting in the Canadian Forces. Right now, we're short about 15,000 positions, which is a lot.
Mm.
And they were talking about even somebody transitioning to the reserve position can take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years.
Wow.
And I think I just told you how quickly my situation changed, but that was back in 2001. So a little bit different now. It takes a bit longer, but definitely is something that someone should consider if they haven't decided what exactly they want to do. And anyway, look at a reserve position if you think that that would be a suitable position for you.
Okay. You're actively involved in your community, particularly with the Lions Club and the Royal Canadian Legion. What drives your passion for community service, and how do you see it connecting to your military background?
Well, I think that depending on what organization you belong to, I had always said that with my military career, we moved around quite a bit, and so really weren't able to join any kind of organization that wanted to keep people for long term. So I said once I get out of the Reg Force or the regular force, anyway, I would look at or other organizations. So the Lions Club, we were living in Hansford at the time, and they needed new members. When we joined, they probably had around 30 to 35 members, and now we're down to probably about 16 members. So,
Okay.
and we are the young ones in our club right now.
Oh, wow.
So we're having a hard time getting newer and younger members to join, whether it be our club or any other club. Getting somebody to volunteer their services, it seems to be a harder thing to do now.
Why do you think that is? Do you think there's some kind of generational difference in terms of how people view community service?
There may be. I know that certainly people are maybe having fewer kids or fewer children than they had in the past, but they're very active. I mean, they have their children involved in a couple of different sports, a couple of different kind of organizations. They're very busy. So there is that aspect to it as well. So I think when you get older and your kids are a little old, grown up, then it makes makes it easier to look around and decide what you want to do. But I've always felt that service to the community, service to others is important.
Yeah, I agree for sure. And that's something like that's one of the positive things we've mentioned Air Cadets in this show so many times, but it's one of the great things that Air Cadets teaches young people is service to the community and the value of that.
Yeah, it does. And it definitely sets a tone for how you look at life and what you want to do later on as you progress in your career.
Your work with the Legion also involves helping veterans navigate the Veterans Affairs Canada system. Can you tell us more about that and how veterans can get help from the Legion?
Yeah, a lot of misunderstanding about what the Legion stands for. And the service officer, which most branches have, you don't have to be a member of the Legion. If you're a veteran, you can go in there and talk to the service officer. If you have an injury that has been documented before you leave the service, then you have a better chance of having a successful claim. Also, as a service officer, you generally know the procedure that is required to get Veterans Affairs involved. And quite often, sometimes a veteran will think that they don't want to do it because the money is coming out of someone else's pocket, and that's certainly not the case.
Mm-hmm.
The money is there for them if they need it. And that's quite often the biggest challenge as a service officer that you would face. Most commands have a command service officer. So if your branch that you are going to for help can't help you, certainly their command service officer can.
Okay, so if there are veterans listening who think they may have some form of claimable injury, their first step could be to go to their local Legion and ask for help with navigating that system.
They can do it on their own. They can go to the Veterans Affairs website, see what is required, and go through the process. But certainly by going to the Legion and having a service officer talk to you and tell you exactly what you need, it can be a great help. And certainly someone who is dealing with PTSD or some other kind of injury like that, then help is definitely needed. And having someone else that can help you navigate through the system, it definitely can help a person.
For sure. I didn't personally use the Legion, but when I went through Veterans Affairs, I did have people who helped mentor me through the process. And I will say, as somebody who has a mental health issue, it was a huge benefit to me to just have somebody there to kind of confirm that what I was doing would likely result in success, and just to have that comforting second set of eyes on the application. The other thing I would want to emphasize for listeners is that you don't have to be out of the military to apply for Veterans Affairs compensation. So if you have a service injury that's chronic, has lasted more than, I believe they say 6 months, and it's service related and it's documented, you need to have a diagnosis, you can apply to Veterans Affairs Canada for that condition.
Yeah, you can. And quite often Veterans Affairs will deal with someone who is already in the military and or the RCMP.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, I did that while I was still in, and there's no problem with that. And also, I should note, your chain of command doesn't get notified or anything like that. So people who are afraid of career ramifications because, I have this injury, but I'm not really, maybe I'm scared to let the doctor know or something like that. Veterans Affairs handles everything separately from the military. They don't notify the military when you apply for a disability pension or anything like that. So it's certainly worth looking into.
Yeah, that's correct. And it's very important for people to understand that everything Veteran Affairs does is confidential and only between you and them.
So I'd like to, as we get close to the end here, I'd like to ask for your advice for new pilots. The first thing I want to ask is, what was the most important thing you would do to keep yourself ready for your job?
Well, certainly depending on what aircraft you're flying, what kind of mission you're doing, the more you could be prepared, the better your trip would go. And so whether that be looking at the weather, at the aircraft suitability, all of those considerations that like go into a successful mission, they must be considered. That's very important.
Mm-hmm. So essentially, being very thorough and having that thorough preparation
and being prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah, and quite often the circumstances will change rapidly and require you to do things maybe a little different than what you had planned on.
That is true. Flexibility is extremely important. Flexibility is the key to air power, as they say.
It is the key.
What would you say makes a good pilot? What skills, both technical and personal, are essential for success in this field?
Yeah. Well, being able to, like I said, make that decision very quickly if required. Knowing your own abilities, that's important. Knowing what other pilots, if you're on a multi-crewed aircraft, knowing their abilities, that's important as well. And just being prepared.
Drawing on your vast experience, what key advice would you offer to aspiring pilots currently in training? What are the biggest challenges they might face, and how can they overcome those challenges?
Well, I always think about the motivational video that I have on my YouTube channel. It's really important that you know what you want to do, but it's even more important to love what you do. And I've always said that there are two types of pilots. There's the natural and people who love it. And sometimes you can be both, but loving what you do makes all the difference in the world. And you're going to work harder if it's you love what you do.
And I would argue that loving flying, it's not necessarily a requirement of being a military pilot, but man, that is going to get you through those long days of study, those simulator sessions, the ground school, all the stuff that's not the flashy, exciting parts of flying, because there is so much that goes on behind the scenes to be a successful pilot in the military.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, Duncan, thank you so much for this chat today. It's been such a treat to learn about your career and hear about these awesome aircraft that you've flown. And I just truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be a guest on the show today. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, and I really enjoyed it. Can I close with a quote?
Yeah, absolutely.
Once you have tasted flight, you will forever walk the earth with your eyes turned skyward. For there you have been, and there you will always long to return.
All right, that wraps up part 2 of our discussion on Duncan MacIsaac's career and Remembrance Day. For our next episode, we'll sit down with Ben, a Special Operations Forces operator who decided to switch to pilot. We'll talk about why he made the switch, what his experience has been like on Phase 1 flight training, and what his successes and challenges have been so far on the next episode of the Pilot Project podcast. Do you have any questions or comments about anything you've heard in this episode? Would you or someone you know make a great guest? Do you have a great idea for an episode of the show? You can reach out to us at thepilotprojectpodcast@gmail.com or on all social media at @podpilotproject. As always, we'd like to thank you for listening today and ask you for your help with the big 3. That's like and follow us on social media, share with your friends, and follow and rate us 5 stars wherever you get your podcasts. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. Keep the blue side up. See ya!
Engineer, shut down all 4.
Shutting down all 4 engines.